Granny, where we come from? Africa. Let me tell you about Africa. Let me tell you about Africa. Land where the walla we come from. Mama Africa. Mama Africa. Mother of civilization. And the land of our forefathers. Mama Africa. Mama Africa.
Good morning. Well, welcome to Michael and Monique White's show. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning, Monique.
Good morning. We were just talking about Africa, so we are all fired up. So what are we going to be talking about today, Michael?
Well, I think today last week during the show, we kind of touched on one of the topics that is controversial and that I think everybody's aware of, and that's the topic of charities and NGOs that are operating in Africa, and primarily those that aren't based in Africa. We're not talking about Africans helping Africans or community-based initiatives that are led by Africans, but those charities and NGOs based in places like the U.S. or the U.K. That operate in Africa, and some of their strategies. And one of the strategies that I think is pretty controversial and that a lot of people object to is the use of children and the use of children in imagery. And that strategy has earned the tagline of poverty porn. I call it emotional extortion. And they use images of children to kind of provoke people into opening their wallets and writing those checks. So we'll have a nice little conversation and discussion about that.
Yeah, Michael, I totally agree that the use of children without the consent of the parent, because when these pictures are taken, the parent don't know how they're going to use the pictures. Most of these parents do not have access to the internet or have access to TV, where they can see that foreign NGOs are taking these pictures and then displaying it into their country, begging for money, using children's pictures without the consent. So not only does this violate a lot of African law, this also is a violation of African Union as a regional organization. They have a very, very good charter on children welfare, and the rights of a child. And the UN, they have an international treaty which is to protect children. So the display of these pictures could be in violation of so many laws, so many child's rights, that it is degrading. As an African woman, I find these pictures very degrading, because it also show. They usually show it during lunchtime. They show it during evening. So it's, like you call it, poverty porn. It get people to react.
If you're not used to that environment, or you're not brought up with those struggles or those challenges, and you kind of live in your bubble and in your comfortable world, you kind of think to yourself, well, who would object to that? It's helping children. Anybody that would find fault with that, they must not like children, or they must not like the work that these charities are doing. That's not the case. Like you said, with the UN charters and the idea of protecting children, it's ironic that these organizations that will say that they're operating, to educate, to support the future of a country, to build, self-esteem or things like that. They'll use all these kind of psychobabble words, but ironically, what they're doing is they are destroying the dignity of a human being. The word dignity is something that has to be kept in mind with everything that a charity does within a community. You have to maintain the dignity of the people that you're there to help. And by exploiting images of children, you're just ripping apart the dignity of that child. And what I've done in in many situations where I may engage or encounter or have a conversation or discussion with people that are a part of these charities is if I see a picture of a child, I'll just simply ask them, what's that child's name? You know, they may be using a stock photo. So, of course, they aren't even the ones who took the photo. They don't even, know where the photo was. So just trying to engage them and make the point without just straight out objecting and telling that they're wrong, but trying to get them to think about what that image represents and to get them to realize that what if this was your child? I mean, what if all of a sudden you saw a picture of your child that was on the cover of a brochure, or the picture of your child that was in a church bulletin, or a picture of your child, imagine your child is sick in bed with the flu or a cold or staying home from school because they're not feeling well. And all of a sudden somebody marches into your child's bedroom, snaps a picture of your child, walks out of your house.
Yeah, Michael, I totally agree. Because you remember when you and I were in Gulu, there was a gentleman that was commissioned from Canada to go to Gulu to take some really degrading pictures. And he went to a lot of the IDP camps and was so disappointed that he did not see anybody that his lips chop up or with, such degrading pictures, because he was being paid to look for that kind of pictures. So most of these pictures that we see on TV, we see on brochure for the NGOs. The NGOs, by the way, is non-governmental organization, charity. They usually pay somebody to go and look for children like this. They go and look for children with flies, running nose. There's no need for our African children to be used in this very degrading way. We totally don't agree with it.
Yeah,
and I find that when these children grow up, if they were to see themselves 20 years, that, okay, my picture was used in this way.
And again, ironically, it shows a lack of empathy. People talk about compassion. I mean, there's even organizations that use the word compassion, like Compassion International. So, compassion is in their name, so they must be compassionate. The issue isn't compassion. The issue is empathy. And empathy says, to me, compassion says you have the intellectual knowledge of trying to help somebody who's struggling. Empathy is different than compassion. Empathy says, put yourself in those people's shoes. Put yourself in those people's situation. And what if that was you? Do you have empathy? Do you have empathy? Put your child in that child's situation and realize that how would you like somebody to capture a moment in time without any context, capture an image of your child and then plaster it in places that is meant to financially enrich you or your organization? That's what's happening. You see it, on commercials, on television. You see it in brochures. Yeah. You see it in stories that are written. It's what feeds this narrative of poor Africa, and it's destructive, and it's really not necessary. It really is not necessary. It is the lowest form of emotional extortion, and engaging in it, to me, kind of tells me that you don't have a better strategy. You're stupid.
Michael, I agree, because to put from the legal point, these also constitute child abuse. Because if they're going out there looking for these pictures, looking for such a picture to put it on the TV or put it in their brochure to solicit money, this is abuse. Abuse of children that the parent don't even know. The parent has not given, it all comes down to consent and permission. Because in the UK, I'm not sure about the US, in the UK, you're not allowed to take any child's picture. Even in school play, you cannot go to school and start taking pictures. You will be arrested by the police. So why are these Western NGOs going to Africa, places like Africa, taking pictures of children without consent and using it to solicit money?
Yeah, and it comes down to financial interest. even if you're a tourist, imagine yourself as a tourist going to Brighton Beach. What's the big one there? Blackpool. Imagine just walking up to another family and snapping pictures of their children. Even if you're not working in it for charity or NGO, even if you're a tourist that's visiting Africa and you just go and take pictures of children, imagine what the parent thinks of that, or what the caretaker, or even if the caretaker or the parent isn't around, imagine somebody
I think
doing
they'll call the police. Yeah, they will call the police.
Exactly.
That person will be arrested. Why are you taking the pictures?
Exactly.
What is the pictures going to be used for?
And even though people may understand that in the UK and the US and be like, well, nobody should ever be able to take a picture of my child, then why are you doing it to children in other parts of the world? I mean, there's this disconnect. There's literally this mental disconnect that people have, and it's driven by financial interests and greed. You know, if you're working for an NGO, it's tied to financial interests. But even if you're a tourist, I guarantee you what that person's going to do is they're going to come back and they're going to show all their friends that picture and say, look at what a great person I am. I went and I saw all this suffering and all this misery, and look at these poor children, and I want to help them. They're trying to basically boost their ego, because I guarantee you that picture is going to end up on Facebook, because the person's going to say, look at me, I was with these poor children. And all of a sudden they post it on Facebook, or they put it out on Instagram. And it's meant to boost their ego to their circle of friends and family, to kind of paint this picture of, I'm better than other people, and I'm better because I care. It's like Africa's the only place on the face of the planet you can give yourself some sort of moral superiority because you care. Africa, because I care. I mean, that's nonsense. And it really needs to stop. One of the things I did while we were talking to Monique was I looked up the definition of pornography. And a lot of people associate pornography with sexual acts, with, whether it's obscenity, whether it's hardcore type of pornography. It's usually associated with sex. But actually, one of the definitions of pornography, and I'll read it right from Merriam-Webster's dictionary, is the depiction of acts in a sensational manner so as to arouse a quick, intense emotional reaction. That's exactly what these images are doing. They are meant to arouse a quick, intense emotional reaction. It's marketing in its lowest form, meant to get somebody to donate money or to write a check or to get out their credit card. And it's really pathetic. It is really, really pathetic.
This is a form of begging using pictures. So then they send their people to go to Africa, and most of these, they end up staying in very, very good prime locations, or they're staying in 5-star hotels. So they're paying the money that they begged on behalf of the kids. Now they're paying for their hotel. They're driving 4x4, and they don't actually even venture out to go and see these children who they're begging on behalf of. Can we talk about that?
Yeah, and it's really, again, it's what I call connecting the dots. You know, people kind of look at how organizations operate, based on events or based on, separate things. But that institution, exists as a whole entity, and it takes money. It takes money for that institution to operate. When you look at organizations with the glossy brochures, or organizations that have, their offices in a high rent neighborhood, relatively be considered a high end fancy neighborhood, where the land costs are more, the rent is more, the cost of housing is more, the cost of living is more. It takes money for them to operate. But people don't look at that and go, wait a second, how are they paying for this? Well, the way that they're paying for it, and the only way that they're paying for it, is that they depend on donors, or they depend on grants, or they depend on philanthropists. So they have to tell a narrative. They have to tell a narrative that's going to encourage people to give them money to support basically their job. They're not out there participating in the free market of trade. They're out there participating in the market of ideas. And their idea that they're selling people is, I'm good, I'm helping unfortunate people. Without me, people will die. Without me and my organization, people will suffer. And since you don't want people to die or suffer, give me money. When you see somebody driving an expensive, 4Runner or 4x4 or Range Rover or nice neighborhood or, eating in nice restaurants, you got to think to yourself, how are they paying for that, for goodness sakes? And unfortunately, and I will say this, I am a disciple of Jesus. I don't like to call myself a Christian anymore because that term tends to carry a lot of baggage now. But as a disciple of Jesus, unfortunately, the worst offenders of this type of emotional extortion are people who call themselves missionaries. It's terrible. These people who call themselves Christians are going in parts of the world and then they invoke the name of Jesus and going, hey, how can you not agree with what I'm doing? Because I'm doing it in the name of Jesus. And if you don't like what I do, then you must not like Jesus. That's rubbish. There's a fantastic essay that was written by Julianne Okoth-Betek. She's an author and an essayist and a poet. And she is the daughter of a very, very well-known Acholi storyteller. And she's carrying on the family tradition of storytelling. And she wrote a fantastic essay that I'd like to read for the listeners that really captures the essence of people's attitudes about places like Africa and helping other people who are less fortunate. Mm-hmm. So I'll read it for the listeners. And this essay is titled, I'd Tell Anyone. I'd tell anyone who wants to help us in Africa to look around their own neighborhood, city, and country. Find someone you think is less fortunate, however you determine fortune to be defined. Have a conversation. Listen. I bet you'll find that much of the time nobody wants to be the recipient of your pity. Nobody wants their experience to be the currency which you deposit the soft sentiments to make sense of your privilege. Realize that the cheap clothing, shiny jewels, fast smartphones, sweet bananas, organic coffee, and the myriad of other things that you have easy access to may be the result of people having been swindled out of their rights to their land and the fruits of their labor. I tell anyone who wants to help us in Africa to get an education that teaches you to question the essence and insistence of people's pictures from certain places to be stock photographs of children who are frozen in a miserable moment. Do they ever grow? What do they become? Their faces provoking pity and the writing of checks to organizations that are invariably headquartered in the richest neighborhoods of those poor countries. Mm-hmm. Do the people in the frozen picture carry luck throughout their lives? Do they die of misery? They are the depository of a burden, of people's tears, of the sorrow of retired men and women who lounge in their retirement homes with their television channels stuck on World Vision programs. I'd tell anyone who wants to help us in Africa to wake up and realize that helping is not a step on a ladder. You up there giving me a hand, me down there. No. I tell anyone who asks how to help us in Africa to have the manners and the understanding to realize that this is also a moment that does not need to be frozen in time. Misery takes turns. This might be the moment of mine, tomorrow yours. Tomorrow, when you have a collection of ignorant but well-intentioned people who want to take pictures with your children smiling and laughing. Children impudent at the camera, as kids everywhere will be. Will that be enough? I tell anyone who wants to help us in Africa to look around and realize that Africans have people who have already looked around their neighborhoods, cities, and countries. They are having conversations and working together, exchanging ideas. Has that worked for you? Maybe it can work for us as well. Grow a heart, grow a useful heart, and then wake up. And that was written by Julianne of Cote VTech.
Thank you so much for pointing out the way forward to helping Africa.
Thank you, Monique, and I look forward to next week's show. Just encourage everybody to tune in next week as we continue to talk about these issues.